Tonight on Primetime, Washington says a deal with Tehran may be within reach, but with Israel demanding nuclear concessions and the Strait of Hormuz still under pressure, this crisis is far from settled. Talks are moving, but so are the risks. Well, good evening. President Trump says an agreement with Tehran is very possible, while Israel says any deal must remove Iran's enriched uranium. For now, diplomacy is moving, but the threat of renewed military action still hangs over the talks.
US President Donald Trump said on Wednesday he expects the war in Iran to end quickly as the United States seeks a deal over Tehran's nuclear program and the Strait of Hormuz. He also said that the US had held very good talks with Iran over the previous 24 hours, adding that a deal between the two sides was very possible.
No, they want to make a deal badly, and we'll see if we get there. If we get there, they can't have nuclear weapons. You know, it's very simple, but what's not to submit? So they had a Navy with 159 ships, and now every ship is blown to pieces and lying at the bottom of the water. They had an Air Force, lots of planes, and they don't have any planes. They don't have any anti-aircraft. They don't have any radar left. Their missiles are mostly decimated. They have some. They have probably 18, 19%, but not a lot by comparison to what they had. And their leaders are all dead. So I think we won.
His comments came as reports emerged from US media that Washington and Tehran could be nearing a one-page deal to end their war. The memo reportedly has 14 points and, according to US news outlet Axios, could serve as the basis for wider nuclear talks. The measures under discussion include suspending Iran's uranium enrichment, lifting sanctions, and restoring free transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials say the proposal is still being reviewed. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei said Tehran will study the offer carefully before responding through Pakistani mediators. Senior Iranian lawmakers also warned that Iran is ready to respond if tensions rise further, unless the United States makes major concessions. Despite ongoing talks, President Trump warned military action could resume at a much higher intensity if negotiations fail. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister says Israel remains in full coordination with Washington, adding that he speaks with President Trump almost daily and that both leaders agree all enriched uranium must be removed from Iran.
We share common objectives, and the most important objective is the removal of enriched material from Iran, all of the enriched material, and the dismantling of Iran's enrichment capabilities. President Trump believes he can achieve this one way or another. However, we are prepared for any scenario, and that is the directive I have given to the IDF and our security agencies as well. Israel is stronger than ever. Iran and its proxies are weaker than ever.
In the meantime, oil markets remain highly sensitive to developments between Washington and Tehran, with any rise in tensions around the Strait of Hormuz likely to push energy prices higher and add pressure to the global economy.
And that diplomatic track now appears to be shaping the next phase of the crisis. Well, Trump says he is pausing the operation to reopen Hormuz after what he calls major progress with Tehran. But even as talks move forward, a strike on an Iranian tanker shows how quickly this could still turn. Ube Shobanda has more.
President Trump has declared that he's pausing Project Freedom, which was meant to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for a short period. His negotiations with Iran, according to the U.S. president, have shown, quote, great progress. Senior U.S. officials have revealed on Wednesday that U.S. demands on Iran will include a 20-year enrichment ban on nuclear material and a ban on all underground nuclear work. The White House says that it is getting closer to an agreement with Iran, and that a one-page memorandum of understanding has been submitted to Tehran that could end the war and establish a framework for more detailed nuclear negotiations. The U.S. expects Iran to respond to the proposal in the coming days. The deal would have Iran commit to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment. In return, the U.S. would agree to lift sanctions and release billions of dollars of frozen funds. And both sides would lift restrictions on the transit of shipping vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. The one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding is reportedly being negotiated between Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and several Iranian officials, both directly and through mediators. The MOU would declare an end to the war in the region and the start of a 30-day period of negotiations on a detailed agreement that would open the Strait of Hormuz and significantly limit Iran's nuclear program, as well as the lifting of sanctions. In other developments, a U.S. fighter jet fired on an Iranian-flagged oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman on Wednesday, disabling the rudder of the ship after it failed to comply with repeated warnings that it was violating the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, according to U.S. Central Command. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Well, Iran may be talking to Washington, but it's not lowering its guard. Tehran says it still fears renewed attacks, even as reports suggest a possible peace framework could be announced within days. Toraj Shirililu sent us this report.
The Iranian parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, has said that Tehran does not rule out renewed military or terrorist attacks, despite unofficial reports of a possible peace process agreement with the U.S. to be announced this week. In an audio message to the Iranians on Wednesday, the top negotiator with the United States said that Iran does not underestimate the possibility of a military attack, especially a terrorist attack. His remarks on the likely military action and terrorist act hinted at the past Israeli-U.S. wars in June 2025 and February 2026, as well as killing of Iranian officials at the time the Iranian and U.S. negotiators were talking indirectly and exchanging draft proposals and counter-proposals. High-ranking Iranian officials, including civilian statesmen and military commanders, stressed that the Islamic Republic does not trust the United States this time again either. President Masoud Pezeshkian told his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron in a phone call on Wednesday evening that any effective negotiation requires an end to the war and guarantees that hostile actions will not be repeated. In another signal that Iran distrusts the U.S. despite of news of a peace arrangement, Mohammad Marandi, a member of the media team accompanying the Iranian negotiators in Islamabad in April, stressed Tehran's readiness for a potential major attack. In a post on X, he rejected certain U.S. media reports suggesting that a peace agreement will be announced soon. He said Iran is fully prepared for a potential major attack before Trump's trip to China. The U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to visit China next week, while the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi visited Beijing on Wednesday. According to the local news media, quoting the MP and former Foreign Minister Manucher Mottaki, Iran responds to Washington's counter-proposal peace plan before the weekend. However, a source in the Iranian Foreign Ministry told A News it was unlikely that Tehran would respond to the U.S. proposal today. Toraj Shirililu from Tehran for A News.
Well, to unpack what this pause really means and whether Washington is negotiating from strength or trying to manage the optics, we're joined now by David Rosenthal, political analyst in Bogota, Colombia. David, very good indeed to have you with us on Primetime tonight. Trump says the pause of Project Freedom then was because talks with Iran have started to move. Is this confidence from Washington, do you think, or a way to climb down without calling it that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that this is less about climbing down and more about tactical sequencing. Trump understands that military pressure only works if the other side believes escalation remains possible. By pausing, Project Freedom after just one day, while keeping the naval blockade fully in place. Washington can present itself as giving diplomacy a genuine opportunity without actually removing the threat. It also gives Trump a domestic narrative. He pursued peace first, but the signal is unmistakable. He posted great progress, like we saw, on Truth Social and threatened to bomb Iran at a much higher level within the same 24 hours. That is not contradiction, that is like more a leverage management.
Yeah, very interesting. The proposal itself reportedly offers sanctions relief and frozen funds in return for limits on enrichment. Does that give both sides something they can sell at home, do you think? Or is it just too exposed politically?
Yeah, I think that both governments need like a narrative of victory, and on paper this formula provides one. So Iran gets economic oxygen, sanctions relief, and billions in frozen assets unfrozen. After years of compounding internal pressure, Washington gets verifiable enrichment restrictions. It can present as having stopped a nuclear breakout without a prolonged ground war. The problem now is political fragility on both ends. So, in the United States, critics will argue that sanctions relief simply recapitalizes the regime. So, also inside Iran, hardliners who have been growing louder through this conflict will frame any long term restrictions as a strategic humiliation. So at the end of the day, the deal may be technically workable. Whether it survives its own domestic politics is a separate question entirely.
And talking of long term, David, a 20-year ban on uranium enrichment, I mean, that is a huge demand, isn't it? Is that a serious end goal, do you think, or kind of an opening position that will likely get softened once the real bargaining starts?
Yeah, this about the 20 years is a negotiating answer, not a final position, I think. And we already know it's moving on. So Iran contract with a figure in the single digits. The latest US proposal has quietly dropped it to somewhere above 10 years. So at the end, no, the headline number is already dead in practice. So also the deeper problem is not duration; it is the underlying question of whether Iran retains any enrichment right at all. Netanyahu, Israel, has been explicit. So the goal is to remove all enriched material, the uranium, and dismantle the program entirely, the nuclear program. So that maximalist position is incompatible with anything that Tehran can politically survive. So the real negotiation is not about 20 years. I think the real scenario here is 20 years versus 10. So it is about whether Iran can be left with enough to call its sovereignty, while Washington has enough to call its security.
And in terms of the negotiation, the personnel really matters, doesn't it? The names around this process matter, with people like Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff reportedly involved. Does this look a bit more like classic diplomacy, or is it a sort of Trump-style deal-making push? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think this is a very special diplomacy, and also, of course, is Trump inside that. This looks far more like Trump-style transactional diplomacy than anything the State Department would recognize. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff operate through personal relationships, back-channel contacts, economic incentive, and deal structures built on pressure and recalibration. So Trump prefers envoys. He personally trusts over institutional frameworks, and that can produce speed and flexibility. But there is a structural mismatch here that no amount of deal making instinct resolves. So Iran's political system does not function transactionally. Decisions ultimately flow through the supreme leader, so it's Trump, of course, whose current status remains uncertain, who cannot be reached through personal envoy logic, and who, according to U.S., the supreme leader of Iran, also officials, according to the U.S. officials, has been receiving messages carried by hand to undisclosed locations. So they don't know where is him exactly or how is him. You cannot close a deal with someone you cannot get to the table. So in this situation, this is a very special and unique now in the last years of diplomacy.
And David, we've had a tanker strike in the Gulf of Oman while talks are still progressing. Is that meant to keep pressure on Tehran? And is there a risk that action like that could really blow a hole in negotiations?
I see that is the most dangerous part of this entire picture. A tanker strike during active negotiations sends one message clearly. The military dimension never leaves the table, so it may be intended as calibrated pressure, reminding Tehran what failure looks like. But these incidents are structurally unstable, because miscalculation moves faster than diplomacy. So one strike, one retaliation, one casualty event involving Gulf alliance, all the Arab world, and the political calculus in Washington, Tehran or Riyadh can shift overnight. Iran has already cited Israeli operation in Lebanon as grounds for keeping the strait closed, the Hormuz Strait. So the region is not on the verge of a deal and simultaneously stable. It is one incident away from the whole framework collapsing, and I think both sides know it. They know about all of this situation.
Yeah, a huge amount still at stake. David, we appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at why Lebanon's ceasefire is under strain after Israel's strike on Beirut, and new evacuation warnings. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Lebanon is back in focus tonight, and that ceasefire is already under real strain. Well, Israel says it struck Beirut to target a Radwan force commander, while new evacuation warnings north of the Litani River are raising the question of whether this could now widen again.
Tensions remain high across the Middle East as Israel continues its operations in Lebanon. Airstrikes hit southern Beirut on Wednesday, marking the first attack on the Lebanese capital since the ceasefire came into effect last month. The escalation comes amid wider diplomatic efforts to ease regional tensions, including ongoing US-Iran negotiations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the target was a commander from the Radwan force, an elite unit of the group. In a joint statement with Defense Minister Israel Katz, he said the operation was intended to prevent future attacks on Israeli troops and communities. Israeli media report the commander was killed, though neither the Israeli military nor Hezbollah has confirmed his death. Earlier, Israel issued evacuation warnings for several villages north of the Litani River, raising concerns of a possible expansion of military operations deeper into Lebanese territory. Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam says it is still too early for high-level talks, with diplomatic channels between the two sides remaining limited.
OK, we're going to take a short break now. We'll be back in just a few moments' time. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Now let's pick up on that story from Beirut and to look at what this strike means for Lebanon, Israel and the wider regional picture. We're joined now by Dr. Hamid Khan al-Mashriqi, strategic affairs expert and journalist who is in London for us. Dr. al-Mashriqi, very good indeed to have you on Primetime. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Israel says this was a targeted strike on Radwan Force commander, but politically, how big a moment is it when Beirut is hit for the first time since this ceasefire began?
Thank you very much. I think it's very significantly important, and it has no justification in the presence of ceasefire that, again, it's a great violation from Israel about the ceasefire. And it shows that Israel is the one who's playing the spoiler's role in the entire ceasefire and in the entire, current situation in the region. And obviously, it is very much alarming for the Iran as well. I'm sure you remember when in the beginning of the ceasefire, Iran was very much, enforcing that the ceasefire in Lebanon must be the part of the ceasefire. Later on, it was agreed by America, it was agreed by Netanyahu. Sadly, the Netanyahu's or Israeli plans about the annexure of south of Lebanon with Israel's borders and adding it into the Israel territory is the biggest matter at the moment, because we have seen over 1.5 million people have been displaced internally in Lebanon from the south of Lebanon to the other side of the central sides of the Lebanon.
Yeah.
Because it is very, strategically it is very important for Hezbollah to maintain their control and to have, to be able to resist against Israeli occupation. But this attack has alarmed the whole situation, where we have seen the reports from Reuters and other institutions that there is a very high chance of a one-pager memorandum of understanding between United States and Iran to permanently end this war and conflict. And then there will be a final agreement.
Do you think things have changed then? The ceasefire is still formally in place, obviously, but does this now change the reality on the ground? Are we moving from a truce into something a bit more unstable?
To be very honest, the current ceasefire, I'm always keep saying on different channels that it is very sensitive. It is like on a volcano, and it is very dangerous. It can erupt any time, and it can turn into a big escalation again any minute. So I think Iran is showing restraint, not to showing a bigger retaliation or reaction from so far attacks from Israel. And but at the same time, it is very sensitive. And again, when we talk about the current situation, I mean, America and President Trump is not consistent with his own statements. On the one hand, he's trying to put the pressure on Iran that they have to come on their terms and they have to come to sign the agreement. On the other hand, the reality is that Trump tried to take control of Strait of Hormuz by the Freedom Project, and that have been failed as well. So it is very, I would say, critical situation for President Trump, and he's the one who has to stop Netanyahu to sabotage the peace process or the efforts, because it can sabotage the whole efforts in the ceasefire.
Now, Israel has issued evacuation warnings north of the Litani River. I mean, doesn't that suggest a limited operation, an attempt at least to take a more humanitarian approach to give people that warning? What do you make of that?
it is very alarming because it means that Israel is preparing for another, maybe large-scale attack on south of Lebanon, and again, what we are talking about, controlling the further territory in that particular the bridge which is attached to south of Lebanon and the rest of the part, and then Israel understands that if they will carry on attacking, there will be a reaction from Hezbollah. There might be reaction from other, Houthis and others as well. So, I mean, it is very critical. I mean, even Iran is watching at the moment. We have seen, the IRGC headquarters reaction that they are monitoring the situation, which means they do understand that there is a limit. They will hold it. Otherwise, they will have to react. Otherwise, it will be showing their weaknesses. And at this stage, Iran doesn't want to show any weakness in terms of ceasefire or in terms of negotiations or in terms of signing the MOU in coming days.
And Lebanon's Prime Minister has said it's too early for high-level talks. I think we may have lost you. We're having a technical hitch with Dr. Al-Mashriki. We're just going to take a very short break now, and we'll be back in just a few moments' time. Welcome back. You are watching Primetime Now. I'm delighted to say that Andy Mioch has arrived in the studio with the business. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, oil prices have hit a two-week low on Iran deal optimism. Asia-Pacific markets have rallied, led by Japan. There's some quarterly reports and some news on AI as well. So let's dig in. First up, oil prices extended losses, sliding by more than 2% to take the Brent crude benchmark below $100 per barrel on renewed hopes for a U.S.-Iran peace deal that could bring a gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Brent crude futures fell toward $97.5 per barrel on Thursday, extending a sharp decline from the previous session as investors weighed the prospects for a Middle East peace deal. Reports suggested that the US sent a one-page memorandum of understanding through Pakistani intermediaries aimed at formally ending the conflict and paving the way for the gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran is expected to respond within days after confirming it was reviewing the US proposal. Broader negotiations surrounding Iran's nuclear program are reportedly set to take place later. However, US President Donald Trump cautioned that a deal has not yet been finalized, and it would be a big assumption that Iran would accept the proposal, while threatening to resume military strikes if it fails to comply. Meanwhile, latest data showed US oil exports climbed to a record high last week, as countries increasingly turned to American supply amid shortages linked to the conflict.
Still with energy, Shell has reported a $1.3 billion jump in profits, driven in part by wild swings in oil prices triggered by the Iran war and higher prices for gasoline and jet fuel. The UK energy major said earnings for the first 3 months of the year rose to $6.9 billion, almost a quarter higher than a year ago.
Shell's first quarter profit beat estimates and hit its highest in 2 years at $6.9 billion on Thursday. It was boosted by gains linked to the Middle East war, leading the company to raise the dividend by 5%. At the same time, it slowed its quarterly share buyback program to $3 billion from $3.5 billion. That's to help divert cash to its balance sheet as a short-term liquidity squeeze after war-related energy supply disruption increased its debt. Shell's shares were down over 3% in early trading, broadly in line with other oil majors, as oil prices have retreated from peaks well above $100 a barrel. Shell's results echo big oil trading profits at its European peers, BP and Total Energies, that also take speculative bets on moving prices in contrast with their more cautious US rivals. Shell's oil and gas output fell 4% compared with the previous quarter, mainly due to outages in Qatar. Part of its Pearl gas to liquids plant was damaged in the Middle Eastern conflict. Shell said repairs might take about a year.
Shipping group Maersk beat first quarter profit forecasts, but kept its full-year earnings guidance unchanged, warning the Iran war had clouded the outlook for freight rates and costs.
Maersk beat first quarter profit forecasts on Thursday. The shipping group's earnings before tax and other costs reached $1.7 billion. That beat analyst forecasts, but was well below last year's number. However, the first quarter didn't capture the Middle East war's full impact on global supply chains, as the conflict only began in late February. Analysts often watch Maersk's results as it is seen as a bellwether for global trade. The Middle East war has disrupted shipping routes across the region, that after Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz to commercial traffic, pushing up costs like fuel. Maersk said freight rates fell during the quarter due to continued capacity oversupply, but then rose sharply toward the end of the period following the outbreak of the war. Looking ahead, the Danish shipping giant kept its full-year earnings guidance unchanged. It still projects global container volume growth of between 2% and 4%, but warned the situation was volatile. Maersk first said the Iran war had clouded the outlook for freight rates and costs. Shares were down more than 3.5% in early trade as investors worried how high fuel prices could hit profits.
Asia-Pacific markets rallied on rising hopes for an easing of tensions in the Middle East. Japan stocks rose more than 5%, with the benchmark Nikkei ending above 62,000 points for the first time. Tech sector suppliers led the rally.
Japan's Nikkei share average shot to a record high on Thursday, and the nation's bonds rallied as financial markets reopened after holidays, catching up with optimism over strong technology earnings and signs of a potential peace deal in the Middle East. The benchmark Nikkei 225 index jumped 5.5%, the most in more than a year, to close at an unprecedented 62,833 points. The broader topics climbed 3%. There were 174 advances on the Nikkei index against 49 decliners. The largest percentage gainers in the index were tech sector suppliers, led by Ibiden, up 22.4%, followed by Sumco, which surged 19.7%, and Kioxia, 19.2% higher.
In AI news, Anthropic announced a deal with Elon Musk's SpaceX to use all of the compute capacity at his company's Colossus One data center. As part of the agreement, Anthropic will get access to some 300 megawatts of compute capacity.
Anthropic on Wednesday said it reached a deal to tap the computing resources of Elon Musk's SpaceX, marking a détente with its one-time critic and a boost for both companies in the high-stakes artificial intelligence race. Under the agreement, Anthropic will use the full computing power of SpaceX's Colossus One facility in Memphis, Tennessee, which houses more than 220,000 NVIDIA processors and will give the Claude chatbot maker 300 megawatts of new capacity within a month. The deal gives the IPO-bound SpaceX a marquee customer as it looks to sell investors on its AI ambitions, while helping Anthropic ease capacity constraints following a surge in demand for products, such as its AI coding tool, Claude Code. The announcement came as Anthropic held a developer day in San Francisco on Wednesday, where it unveiled a new Claude AI feature called Dreaming, that is meant to help its AI systems learn by reviewing work between sessions, spotting patterns, and updating files that store user preferences and other context.
Staying with AI, Chinese startup DeepSeek could be valued at as much as $50 billion in its maiden fundraising drive, three sources told Reuters, as the large language model builder seeks to reverse its years-long strategy of rejecting outside funding.
Chinese AI startup DeepSeek could be valued at as much as $50 billion in its opening fundraising drive, according to three sources cited by Reuters. The large language model builder aims to reverse its years-long strategy of rejecting outside funding. In talks to be the lead investor is China's $8.8 billion National AI Fund, said one of the sources familiar with the matter. Separate sources said the startup could raise $3 to $4 billion from the funding round to fuel its computing capabilities and improve employee benefits. The sources added Chinese tech giant Tencent Holdings has also been in talks to invest in the startup. The fundraising comes at a time when DeepSeek is losing ground to domestic competitors that have raised billions from either private or public markets.
Well, that's all in the business brief for tonight. Handing it back to you, Guy.
Andy, as always, thank you very much indeed. And continuing this AI theme, after the break, we'll take a look at how artificial intelligence is moving onto the battlefield, from target selection to faster military decision-making. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Now, AI is becoming a powerful tool in modern warfare, not by replacing commanders, but by speeding up the choices they make. It can scan intelligence, flag targets, and rank threats in seconds, raising a difficult question. How much control does the human really keep?
In modern wars, AI is mainly used as a decision support tool, helping human commanders make sense of overwhelming information. Militaries, such as those of Israel and the United States, use AI to analyze satellite images, intercepted communications, logistics data, and even social media. These systems can quickly flag possible targets, rank threats, and suggest priorities far faster than humans alone. Crucially, AI does not fire weapons by itself. A human still makes the final call. Companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, whose model Claude has reportedly been used by the US military, say humans remain in the loop. However, experts warn that speed creates risks. When decisions must be made in seconds, humans may simply approve AI recommendations without proper scrutiny. Since AI works by predicting probabilities rather than truly understanding the world, mistakes in fast-moving, high-stakes combat could have devastating consequences.
Well, joining us now in the studio is Dr. Gloria Shakuti, who works on AI emerging technologies and how they are changing war and international security. Gloria, I'm delighted to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I mean, this is scary and fascinating in equal measure. When people say AI is changing war, then, what do they actually mean? Is it about better intelligence? Is it faster strikes, or a completely different way of fighting?
To tell the truth, it's all of them at the same time, because like when we talk about AI and it's used in the military, we have kind of change or compressing the kill chain, what it's called in the military, starting from collecting information. This may be from satellites or even from the civilians' data usages from their cell phones, and going further to analyzing this data, and then to try to take as much as possible to create scenarios on that, to create the targeting lists, or even to suggest you what kind of weapons you can use and how you can use, and lastly to suggest you a foreign policy to justify the usage of these weapons. So when you see it this way, it's like all of three what you mentioned. We see like the war becoming faster, and we see new ways of the war being conducted, which is totally changing the nature of the warfare in general. It's about also the human in the loop that we're talking about, because like most of the time the human is very few in the loop in here in giving decisions. So like the biggest questions right now are related to that. Should the human be on the loop or outside of the loop?
I mean, it's a fascinating question, that, because I mean, obviously, as you say, things can happen so much faster now with this technology. To some degree, though, it's difficult for commanders, isn't it? Because in a sense, aren't they trusting machinery codes to make often pretty complex moral calculations?
Exactly, and there is something about this, it's called like automation bias, where you have just kind of 10 seconds in there to decide whether you agree with the decision that the algorithms gave to you or not. And if you don't decide fast, you can have higher consequences in a warfare. So you have to take advantage of those 10 seconds. And at this point, like the commanders have to decide whether they agree with the algorithm decisions or not. And generally there is this kind of automation bias because you think it's coming through an algorithm, it's coming through a whole analysis of data that the people cannot do. So it's easier for the commanders to accept what's been given by the algorithm there. But still there is the question how ethical and how correct that decision is.
I mean, we all fear, I think, Gloria, the sci-fi movie scenario, don't we, where it's the machine, it's the automator, the AI, if you like, making the decisions, and actually the human beings are sort of abstracted slightly and kind of helpless to stop things that are going on. I mean, how likely is that a scenario to happen in the near future?
So this is one of the most difficult questions I generally give, and it's very difficult for us to give a response. It's quite possible, but it depends on how much the people are going to allow that, how much are we going to accept that, especially when it comes to military. However, it's difficult because like when states start to use artificial intelligence in military, as we mentioned, the fastest is the one that wins. So the states have a higher risk in here, whether letting go of the AI or not. So the risk for the AI to take control is really very high, and it depends totally on the leaders of the states and the officials in the military, the commanders, to decide whether they will give this much power to AI or not.
Now, you've written extensively on Ukraine, Gaza, the conflict, the US-Israel conflict with Iran. Do you notice that these real-life battlefields are starting to become the testing ground for some of this stuff we've spoken about?
Yeah, unfortunately, we can say that these states became kind of laboratory where the new ways of warfare that we mentioned at the beginning are trying to be used, like the way how the intelligence is gathered, the way how the targets are decided, or how they are targeted, how they are hit, or the simulations that's coming with AI as well. So all of the war in Ukraine or Gaza or Iran were kind of laboratory for experimental for the greater powers, for the US and China. So somehow in these laboratories they learn the strategies of each other, because indirectly we will see these two powers fighting after. So every time you'll see like these great powers learning from the mistake, learning about the strategies of each other. That's why unfortunately we can say that all of these wars that we're seeing right now are just experiments for what's coming next.
And finally, Gloria, another uncomfortable question. Does this advancement in AI in warfare, do you think it makes the likelihood of civilian harm lesser or greater?
When we talk about military and AI, we used to talk also about drones at the beginning, because drones are kind of the beginning of what we're seeing right now. We always say that, okay, they will do precise tracking and less civilians. But what we saw, it was, okay, precise tracking, but more civilians being targeted. So when we talk about AI as well, there is a huge probability that the collateral damage will be quite high in here. We saw it in the Iranian war that a lot of innocent people were hit, a school was hit, or a park was hit just because of these algorithm problems, miscalculations. So unfortunately, for the future, we can also think of a higher collateral damage in terms of the civilians.
Well, it's a fascinating, vital subject. Dr. Gloria Shakurti, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Turkey's view of the South Caucasus peace track as Baku and Yerevan edge closer to a possible settlement. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us. Turkey is reaffirming its commitment to lasting stability in the South Caucasus. Vice President Cevdet Yılmaz told journalists that Azerbaijan and Armenia have already made significant progress toward a final settlement, bringing the region closer to a diplomatic breakthrough.
We want to see peace in the South Caucasus. Armenia and Azerbaijan have made very significant progress in this regard, and we believe that peace is now within reach. With the establishment of this peace, the South Caucasus, a region of immense strategic importance, will play a new and distinct role on both the regional and global stage. In particular, the development of the Middle Corridor and the opening of the Zangezur Corridor will bring both enhanced security and greater prosperity to the entire region.
Well, Azerbaijan and Turkey are widening a partnership that already reaches well beyond politics and security. This time the focus is labour relations. Trade union representatives from both countries have held talks on closer coordination, shared experience and practical cooperation. So what does this tell us about how Baku and Ankara are building ties across institutions, not just between governments, but also elsewhere? Well, joining us now from Istanbul is Dr. Tolga Biliner, Director of the Galatasaray University Centre for Strategic Research. Tolga, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime tonight. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Labour relations, trade unions, it may sound very technical, but why does this kind of cooperation matter for these two countries?
Technical means sustainable also. Ankara-Baku relationship is a strategic partnership. It's not a regular cooperation. It's not an ordinary bilateral relationship. And strategic relationships are long-term engagements. They are built through societies, institutions, workers, economic networks. Trade union cooperation that you mentioned shows that Azerbaijan-Turkey partnership is becoming more structural and more societal with every passing day. The interdependence between these two countries is growing. It is no longer only about cultural proximity or historical ties, political solidarity, and so on. It is a comprehensive model of regional integration.
Yes, with people very much at the heart. And what practical difference can closer coordination between trade unions actually make for those workers, do you think? Also for the public institutions and economic ties between the two countries?
It can help improve professional standards, worker protection, and institutional coordination. Economic ties between Azerbaijan and Turkey are developing, so the social dimension also becomes important. Sustainable regional integration cannot rely only on infrastructure or short-term commercial relations. It also needs social stability, predictability, and qualified human capital. Trade union cooperation reflects the structural convergence between Turkey and Azerbaijan. Economic integration now increasingly requires social and labor coordination as well.
And we often describe Baku and Ankara as strategic allies, but how is that alliance now being built beyond things like defence, energy and high-level diplomacy?
We are now seeing a multidimensional partnership emerging. Transport corridors, logistics, education, reconstruction projects. I also think about reconstruction of Karabakh, digital infrastructure, tourism, industrial cooperation are becoming increasingly important. In many ways, Azerbaijan and Turkey are building a connected regional ecosystem. The international system is increasingly organized around networks rather than only borders. The time of happy globalization is over. Instead of a single integrated globalization dominated exclusively by the West, we see emerging regional blocs, corridor diplomacy, minilateralism initiatives, and regional production networks. Geoeconomics is replacing geopolitics, and the two countries are acting accordingly. This cooperation also reveals that the two countries' decision makers are aware of the social dimension of geoeconomics.
Two countries acting accordingly. Clearly, there is a lot of positive elements to this. Where are the limits of this cooperation, though? Are there areas where the two countries still perhaps need to do a bit more work to make the partnership deeper and more practical?
The political relationship is already very strong, but institutional and societal integration still needs to deepen further. More joint projects in education, especially in higher education, in innovation, labor mobility, and technological cooperation could make the partnership more resilient. Of course, a critical question remains: how much ordinary citizens will concretely benefit from these strategic projects? I think about improving social welfare, income distribution, and everyday living conditions. That remains to be seen. These are also important if you want to stop the brain drain. Well-being of the population and social resilience are also part of the national security equation. Besides, not every foreign player is happy of these two countries getting closer. So we also have to be vigilant about external disruptive elements.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. And looking forwards, what do you think could be the next major pillar of cooperation between Azerbaijan and Turkey? Will it be education, AI, transport, or something else?
I believe connectivity and technology will be decisive. The war in Ukraine and the war in Iran changed all calculations about logistics, energy flows, transit calculations, regional trade patterns. Therefore, Ankara and Baku gained additional strategic importance as connectivity hubs. That naturally increases the importance of cooperation and institutional coordination, of course, by respecting each other's sovereignty, independence, and without forgetting national priorities of both countries that are not always convergent. So we have to be realistic and pragmatic. Besides, the international system is increasingly characterized by fragmentation, regionalization, and competition between great powers. In this context, the Middle Corridor, digital infrastructure, artificial intelligence, logistics, industrial modernization could define the next phase of Turkish-Azeri partnership. Maybe this is my academic reflex speaking, forgive me for insisting on it, but education and human capital will be essential because today, among many other things, a country's power depends also on knowledge and skilled populations.
Well, we're very grateful for your academic analysis, Dr. Bilaner. We thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Critical minerals are no longer just about trade. They're now part of the security equation. G7 ministers meeting in Paris are looking at how to reduce dependence on China, even as fresh tariff tensions test Western unity. Anita Sharma has the latest.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where the Group of Seven sees critical minerals not just as a trade issue, but as a matter of economic security and resilience. Meeting in Paris, G7 trade ministers focused on securing supply chains for rare earths and other strategic materials that are essential for EVs, semiconductors, defense systems, and advanced technologies. The meeting took place amid growing concern in Western capitals over China's dominance in the mining, processing, and refining of critical minerals, and fears that economic dependencies could be weaponized during future geopolitical disputes. In a joint statement, ministers warned against what they described as economic coercion and pledged to reduce strategic vulnerabilities linked to concentrated supply chains and non-market practices. But the meeting also unfolded against a backdrop of rising trade tensions between Europe and the U.S. President Donald Trump threatened new tariffs on European-made cars and continues to push allies to reduce reliance on Chinese supply chains while simultaneously pressuring trading partners over market access and industrial subsidies. That has complicated efforts to present a fully united Western economic front, particularly as European governments try to balance transatlantic ties with protecting their own industrial competitiveness. French Trade Minister Nicolas Forissier said the goal is to ensure G7 countries are not held hostage by nations that dominate key resources. That's a clear reference to Beijing's influence over global rare earth markets. Officials also discussed closer coordination on stockpiling, investment screening, and industrial policy, alongside reforms to strengthen the World Trade Organization and counter industrial overcapacity. The discussions reflect a broader shift now taking place across Europe and the G7, where trade policy, industrial strategy, and national security are becoming increasingly interconnected. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Turkey's defence industry is moving from national showcase to global sales pitch. New export figures, fresh international agreements and advanced unmanned aircraft exports underline Ankara's push to turn military technology into international influence. Adam Morrow picks up the story.
The defense sector is again in the spotlight here in Turkey, where Trade Minister Omar Bolat announced Wednesday that Turkish defense and aviation exports topped $2.8 billion in the first 4 months of 2026. The figure marks a 28% increase on the same period last year, highlighting Ankara's growing ambition to turn its defense industry into a major export engine. And the Saha 2026 defense exhibition, now underway in Istanbul, is providing the stage for that push. At the exhibition on Wednesday, Turkey and Kenya signed a major defense cooperation agreement. Aimed at enhancing bilateral defense ties, the deal was signed by Turkish Defense Minister Yaşar Güler and his Kenyan counterpart, Rosalinda Soypantuya. The same day also saw a major development for Turkish drone manufacturer Baykar. The company signed its first export agreement for its Bayraktar Kızıl Elma unmanned aerial vehicle with Indonesia's PT Republic Aero Digantara. The deal covers a 12-drone squadron scheduled for delivery in 2028, with options for additional aircraft and local production facilities in Indonesia. Taken together, the announcements show how Turkey is combining defense diplomacy, export growth, and advanced drone technology to expand its global footprint. In recent years, Turkey has emerged as one of the world's leading producers of aerial drones, accounting for an estimated 65% of the global armed drone export market. Baykar alone controls roughly 60% of this market, having signed export agreements with 37 countries, both for its tactical TB2 Bayraktar platform and its high-altitude Akinci-class drones. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
And as Adam mentioned, that global push is now visible on the exhibition floor in Istanbul, where Saha 2026 is bringing together defence firms and official delegations from more than 140 countries. A News' Nuray Mustafa is there for us.
The International Defense Exhibition Saha 2026 continues on its next day, bringing together both local participants and national pavilions from various countries. The broad international representation further highlights the event's global significance and its role as a platform for international cooperation. Companies representing different countries are showcasing defense industry products, military technologies, security systems, and innovative solutions throughout the exhibition area. According to official information, more than 140 countries are represented within the framework of Saha 2026. Current information indicates that national pavilions and companies from Azerbaijan, the United Arab Emirates, the United States, Germany, France, China, Japan, Hungary and Slovakia are taking part in the exhibition.
So Canada right now is the only non-European country that's involved in SAFE. And the other exciting part about that is typically non-EU defense procurement only allows non-EU countries to participate at a 35% level. Canada has access to 80%. So again, it's just another mechanism where Canada is looking to cooperate. We have good capacity and capability, and we'll do that ourselves where we can, but again, time is of the essence for us. We need to move quickly.
There's always a collaboration agreement, partnership agreement and MOUs, but we actually announce them once it is signed. So probably later in this show, maybe tomorrow, after tomorrow, there will be some MOU signed and we'll publish it at a time. But these are also an opportunity to meet our partner, because every industry requires, suppliers and integrator and, support partnership with them.
The pavilions feature unmanned aerial vehicles, modern weapon systems, cybersecurity technologies, and other advanced defense industry products. Meetings and presentations involving foreign participants are creating broad opportunities for establishing new partnerships, exchanging expertise, and discussing joint projects. Experts believe that the active participation of international companies and official delegations will make a significant contribution to expanding cooperation in the defense industry across the region. At the same time, the exhibition is regarded as an important platform for local companies seeking access to new markets and opportunities to establish links with international investors. Nuray Mustafa, Avaz Hajiev for A News, Istanbul, Turkey.
Ukraine and Georgia are cautiously reopening a door that had been shut for years. After a rare leader-level meeting and follow-up talks between ministers, Kyiv appears to be rebuilding ties, one conversation at a time. Nini Nikolashvili sent us this report earlier.
On May 4th, on the sidelines of the European Political Community Summit, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sat down with Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze one-on-one for the first time in years. 2 days later, their foreign ministers held a phone call agreeing to meet in person and work toward what both are carefully calling normalization. So what broke them apart? When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Georgia's ruling party, Georgian Dream, refused to join international sanctions against Moscow, and trade between the two countries actually grew. Kyiv recalled its ambassador. Zelensky called Georgia's position immoral. In response, Georgian Dream did not back down. It built a political fortress around the decision. Party elites constructed a narrative that American, European, and Ukrainian officials were conspiring to force Georgia to open a second front against Russia, and anyone pushing back was labeled an enemy of Georgian sovereignty. This narrative was weaponized ahead of the 2024 parliamentary elections, presenting Georgians with a stark choice: Georgian Dream in power or war. This switch, though, is being driven entirely by Kyiv. On May 6th, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga called his Georgian counterpart Maka Bachorishvili, a direct dialogue after their first face-to-face in Yerevan just 2 days prior. Both agreed to meet again in person, but Bachorishvili acknowledged the initiative was coming from Ukraine's side and attached a condition to it. The grievances that accumulated over these years must be understood by Kyiv on Georgia's terms, not dismissed, before relations can genuinely move forward. Zelensky is clearly running a wider play here. This same week, he met with Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, another leader who kept notable distance from Kyiv during the war, agreeing on joint government meetings by the end of June. The pattern is deliberate. Facing a long and unresolved conflict, Zelensky is choosing negotiation and outreach over confrontation, pragmatically rebuilding every relationship he can. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
For the first time in its history, Azerbaijan has teamed up to host an Africa exhibition alongside the Africa Business Forum here in Baku, marking a significant milestone in strengthening economic and trade relations between Baku and the continent. A News presenter Nadia Jani was at the event and sent in this.
I'm here at the Africa-Azerbaijan Business Forum at the Baku Expo Center. This international forum is organized to strengthen economic trade and strategic cooperation between Azerbaijan and African countries. It's all part of a wider initiative to create direct partnerships between companies and provide African businesses with access to Azerbaijani and regional markets. Representatives from over 7 countries in Africa have attended this week to discuss a range of topics from economy, investment, logistics, agriculture, and innovation. Now, I had the opportunity to speak to the president of the Africa Business Council, Dr. Amani Asfour, about the importance of this forum and why Azerbaijan is a special partner in future cooperation and some of the opportunities and challenges that brings.
Azerbaijan have very good technology and knowledge with mining sector. Africa is a huge continent with great mining opportunities. And even now, as Africa Business Council, we are organizing the CAMRAT with the Congress for Mineral Resources Development. How can Azerbaijan be a partner without exploiting the resources of the continent, but within the whole framework of equal partnership, of creating jobs of transfer of technology, of creating wealth for both, building capacity of our mining industry, investment in this sector to transform the continent. So we stop exporting raw materials. This is the first thing, how to make people to people, understand the potentials of each of our regions. The second issue is really what are the policies among ourselves in Africa and in Azerbaijan. Like, for instance, now in Africa, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, where Azerbaijani company can come and invest in any of the countries of the continent. And if they industrialize or add value, then they can export all over the continent with no customs. So it's all against how you use the already existing mechanisms to support trade among ourselves and support investment.
I also spoke to Irena Gafarova, the founder of Africa-Azerbaijan Corporation, and why this was so key for the country and its economic future.
And we are really interested to work with to work directly with African countries, because unfortunately, we are buying the African products via Europe, via Turkey, but not directly from the African countries, yes. And now we are going to do this for our country.
The forum concludes tomorrow, and there are clear signs that things are moving in the right direction to bring a wider benefit to Africa and Azerbaijan in the near future. I'm Nadia Jani for A News.
Caspian Agro Week is giving farming a very futuristic feel, from AI-powered crop monitoring to robots that detect disease and treat plants directly. The Baku Expo Centre is showing how agriculture is becoming smarter, faster and more precise. Abu Hayat Jafarova filed this earlier.
As Caspian Agro Week continues in Baku, smart systems, artificial intelligence and agricultural robots are making modern farming sound a little bit futuristic. So let's go directly to the source. What exactly do robots do in agriculture today?
They automate tasks like planting, weeding and harvesting, increasing efficiency and precision.
Well, looks like the future of farming has officially arrived.
At Caspian Agro Week 2026, researchers from the Scientific Production Association's Biophysical Devices Department are presenting an agro-robot capable of monitoring crops in real time, identifying diseased plants through AI-powered analysis, and applying targeted treatment directly in the field.
The robot uses a targeted nano-fertilizing and misting system that treats only affected plants rather than spraying the entire field, helping save both chemicals and time. Developers describe it as a kind of assistant for agronomists, allowing diseases to be detected early and preventing their spread, ultimately improving productivity. Robotic arms rotate 360 degrees and can also be used solely for monitoring purposes. The system additionally measures soil moisture, pH levels, salinity, and toxic gas emissions caused by chemicals used in agriculture. Sensors installed on the agro-robot monitor gas levels and alert agronomists if dangerous limits are exceeded.
International exhibitors are also using Caspian Agro Week 2026 as a platform to expand cooperation with Azerbaijan's agricultural sector. Representatives of Spanish manufacturer ID David say the family-owned company has more than a century of history and is considered one of Europe's leading producers of machinery for vineyards, wineries and orchards. The company has been operating in the Azerbaijani market for nearly 10 years.
We have different experience in vineyards, in orchards, and nowadays we can offer to your market to cover all needs for the farmers who work with any kind of orchards, olive trees, vineyards, fruit trees, apples, nuts. So actually any kind of special crops that Azerbaijan has in market. So what we can offer? We can fight with the weather. So it means that your soil will be healthy. You don't need to use herbicide, and it means that final product will be much more will have much more quality at the end.
Among the Turkish companies participating in Caspian Agro Week 2026 is the Izmir-based company Gearbox, which specializes in reducers and gearbox systems for agriculture, livestock farming, agricultural machinery, and industrial applications. The company says its products are already widely used across Azerbaijan in farms and production facilities.
We produce helicopter fans for large livestock farms with cattle such as cows and oxen. We also manufacture scraping systems and manure removal systems. We are one of the leading suppliers for large livestock farms. For poultry farms, we produce feed reducers, screw reducers, and elevator reducers. We supply products and motors to many companies in Azerbaijan, including farms, agricultural machinery companies, livestock farms, brick factories, cement factories, and fish farms.
With more than 440 companies from 45 countries taking part, including exhibitors from Italy, Spain, the United States, China, South Korea, Brazil, and several African countries, Caspian Agro Week 2026 is positioning itself not only as a showcase for agricultural innovation, but also as a major regional platform for investment, technology exchange, and the future of sustainable farming.
Central Asia is facing a tightening water and energy squeeze, with demand rising, glaciers shrinking, and major river projects adding pressure. Regional governments are now looking to hydropower as part of the answer. Fariza Kalamazina has the details.
Central Asia is moving closer to a major water and energy crisis. According to a report by the Eurasian Fund for Stabilization and Development, the region could face severe water shortages by 2040, while electricity demand is expected to double by 2050. Countries across the region are already facing winter electricity shortages and relying on expensive fuel imports, while water supplies from glaciers continue to decline as demand rises. The United Nations had also previously warned that water shortages in Central Asia could triple within the next 15 years. The situation is also being complicated by Afghanistan's Kosh-Tepe Canal project, which could divert up to a quarter of the annual flow of the Amu Darya River, increasing pressure on water supplies in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. And against this backdrop, regional officials met in Tashkent for another round of talks on the construction of the Kambarata 1 hydropower plant on the Naran River. The project is being described as a strategic step toward strengthening both energy and water security in Central Asia. According to estimates, the plant could generate around 6,000 gigawatt hours of electricity annually, equivalent to roughly 40% of Kyrgyzstan's current energy supply. And experts say the projects like this may become critical as the region faces growing pressure from climate change, rising consumption, and declining water reserves. Fariza Kalimurdzina, Almaty, A News.
Beijing's global infrastructure drive is entering a more muscular phase. After years of talk about smaller, cleaner projects, the latest figures point to something bigger, a renewed race for energy, minerals and long-term influence. Manor Makdoum has the details for us.
China's Belt and Road Initiative has just posted its strongest year on record. New deals under Beijing's global infrastructure program reached $213.5 billion in 2025, a 75% jump from the year before, according to research by Australia's Griffith University and Shanghai's Green Finance and Development Center. China has now logged $1.4 trillion in investment and construction contracts with 150 countries since the initiative launched in 2013. Energy was the standout sector, accounting for 43% of total BRI engagement, and the figures reveal a striking contradiction. While investment in clean energy such as solar and wind grew, fossil fuel deals surged. Deals in fossil fuels jumped nearly threefold year on year to reach $71.5 billion, the highest proportion of fossil fuel engagement since 2014. Africa emerged as the top destination, with the headline deals including a $23 billion oil and gas development in the Republic of Congo and a $20 billion gas industrial park in Nigeria. Metals and mining also hit a record, reaching $32.6 billion, with roughly 60% of those deals concentrated in Kazakhstan, which holds reserves of 15 rare earth elements. The report's author says that the era of so-called small and beautiful BRI projects is now effectively over, with deal sizes reaching 2 or 3 times the levels of the past decades. Analysts say that the data reflects Beijing's push to lock in strategic resources and expand its economic footprint at a moment when US-led trade pressures are reshaping global supply chains. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Well, let's now take a look at some other top stories from around the world. And Trump's trip to Beijing is now about far more than protocol. With Hormuz closed, energy costs rising and Iran still under pressure, Washington wants China to use its leverage, but the summit will also test whether the two rivals can manage their own tensions.
US President Donald Trump is set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing next week during a 2-day visit, his first trip to China in 8 years. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the two leaders would discuss Iran and urged Beijing to use its influence to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping. The strait has been closed since the outbreak of the US-Israeli conflict with Iran, disrupting energy flows and raising costs for manufacturers. Before the conflict, around a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas moved through the Strait of Hormuz, with much of it headed to Asia. China has a central role because it is the world's biggest crude importer and has been the main buyer of Iranian oil in recent years. That gives Beijing leverage over Tehran, but also leaves it exposed to the energy shock caused by the closure. Diplomacy has intensified ahead of Trump's visit. Iran's foreign minister met his Chinese counterpart in Beijing, where China backed efforts to ease tensions and called for safe passage through the strait. Trump has also paused a US effort to escort ships through the route, citing progress on a possible deal with Tehran. But the crisis is also feeding into US-China tensions. Washington has sanctioned Chinese refineries and shipping companies over purchases of Iranian crude. Beijing has invoked its anti-sanctions law and told companies not to comply with the US measures. Beijing is expected to raise its objections to US arms sales to Taiwan, while Washington is likely to press China on trade barriers and industrial policy. The two sides remain divided over technology controls, with the US limiting access to advanced chips and China tightening its hold over critical minerals used in high-tech manufacturing. This makes the summit not only a test of diplomacy over Hormuz, but also a wider test of whether Washington and Beijing can contain their growing rivalry.
A deadly virus outbreak on a cruise ship is now heading for Europe's doorstep. The MV Hondius is on its way to Tenerife after 3 passengers died, with health authorities preparing quarantines and investigating how the infection spread on board.
The cruise ship MV Hondius, hit by a deadly hantavirus outbreak, has left waters off Cape Verde and is heading to Tenerife in Spain's Canary Islands. The vessel has nearly 150 people on board and is expected to arrive within 3 days. 3 people, a Dutch couple and a German national, have died during the outbreak. According to the World Health Organization, 8 people are suspected to have contracted the virus, with 3 confirmed through laboratory testing. Spanish authorities say the 14 Spanish passengers on board will be quarantined in a military hospital in Madrid for up to 45 days, depending on possible exposure to the virus. Other passengers without symptoms are expected to return to their home countries after the ship docks. 2 seriously ill passengers were evacuated from the vessel and flown towards Europe for specialist treatment. During the transfer, 1 aircraft carrying patients to the Netherlands was denied permission to refuel in Morocco. The plane was later redirected to Gran Canaria, where officials reported a problem with a patient's life support system while awaiting another aircraft. Health authorities are now investigating how the virus spread on board the ship, which began its voyage in Argentina and travelled through remote parts of the South Atlantic.
Bolivia's capital is facing a widening wave of unrest. Teachers, labour unions and indigenous groups are all pressing the government over reforms as police clash with protesters near the presidential palace, and officials warn of attempts to destabilise the country.
Police in Bolivia clashed with protesting teachers near the presidential palace in La Paz as demonstrations over education, labour and land reforms intensified across the capital. Protesters threw tomatoes and firecrackers at officers who responded with tear gas to disperse the crowds. Teachers say they are rejecting plans to decentralise education and are demanding higher salaries and more teaching positions.
We categorically reject the decentralisation of education. We demand respect for the political constitution of the state, a single free public education system, which must be funded by the state and must also be guaranteed by the state.
Bolivia's main labour federation has also continued an indefinite strike and symbolically occupied the labour ministry. At the same time, indigenous and peasant groups arrived in La Paz after marching more than 1,100 kilometres over 29 days, demanding the repeal of Law 1720, which they say threatens collective land rights and encourages deforestation. The government says the law is designed to improve access to credit, but officials accuse some protest leaders and organisations of attempting to destabilise the country.
There is clearly a destabilization attempt. We have exhausted every way and opportunity for dialogue. We have shown great openness to discuss all aspects of what this government is proposing to the country in terms of economic, environmental, and legal security matters. Some organizations and union leaders have accepted this, and as a result, they are not mobilizing.
Officials say further talks with social groups are expected in the coming days as authorities try to ease tensions in the capital.
Russia is warning that Kyiv could face retaliatory strikes if Moscow's Victory Day events are disrupted. The threat comes as both sides accuse each other of breaking ceasefire efforts, while fighting continues across the front line.
Russia warned foreign embassies and international organizations in Kyiv on Wednesday to evacuate personnel, saying retaliatory strikes could target the Ukrainian capital if Victory Day events in Moscow are disrupted.
A note with the following content was sent to all diplomatic missions accredited with the Foreign Ministry and to representations of international organizations. I quote, "On May 4th, 2026, the Russian Defense Ministry issued an official statement in connection with threats by the Kyiv authorities to strike Moscow on a date sacred to all Russians, Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War. The Russian Foreign Ministry strongly urges the authorities of your country, the leadership of your organization, to treat this statement with the utmost responsibility and to ensure the advance evacuation from the city of Kyiv of personnel of diplomatic and other missions, as well as citizens, in view of the inevitability of a retaliatory strike by the armed forces of the Russian Federation against Kyiv, including centers of decision-making, should the Kyiv regime attempt to carry out their criminal terrorist plans."
The warning comes as fighting continues, despite rival ceasefire proposals linked to Russia's May 9th commemorations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces violated Kyiv's proposed truce more than 1,800 times within hours of it taking effect, with attacks continuing along the front line and in civilian areas. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, meanwhile, accused Moscow of focusing on securing the parade rather than advancing peace efforts. As clashes intensified, a Russian strike hit a kindergarten in Ukraine's northeastern Sumy region, killing 2 people. Officials said no children were inside the building at the time of the attack. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission says Russian attacks across 14 Ukrainian regions since last Friday have killed at least 70 civilians and wounded more than 500 others. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry says its forces captured 2 settlements in the Donetsk and Sumy regions over the past 24 hours, while also carrying out strikes on Ukrainian military positions, drone facilities and energy infrastructure across 141 locations. Moscow further claimed its air defense systems intercepted 571 Ukrainian drones, while the Black Sea Fleet destroyed 4 unmanned boats. Ukraine's military, meanwhile, reported 177 clashes along frontline areas and said its forces targeted Russian command centers, assembly points and air defense systems.
Moscow is sharpening its criticism of Armenia's closer ties with the European Union. Russia says Yerevan is being pulled into what it calls Brussels' anti-Russian orbit, warning that the partnership offers Armenia little beyond political symbolism.
After reading the text of the final declaration of the so-called Armenia-EU summit, it becomes obvious that the Republic, with its leadership's approval, is ever closer dragged to the alien standards and mechanisms. Those are not European in terms of European culture and civilization, but aggressive Euro-Atlantic ones. Sooner or later, this course pursued by Armenian authorities will inevitably lead to involvement of Yerevan into Brussels' anti-Russian orbit. The formula of the European Union is simple and banal. It is strange that nobody understands this. To squeeze everything out of Armenia, down to the last drop, in order to use it for its own interests, including Russophobic and anti-Russian ones, without giving anything in return except PR stunts.
Lithuania and Poland say US troops should remain in Europe if Washington moves ahead with plans to reduce its military presence in Germany. Well, the message came during a joint Lithuanian-Polish military exercise near the Suwałki Gap, a strategically sensitive NATO corridor between Russia and Belarus. Lithuania already hosts more than 1,000 US troops and is waiting for the full deployment of a 5,000-strong German brigade by the end of 2027. Poland also says it is ready to receive American soldiers if they are relocated from Germany.
European security is indivisible. That is the foremost principle. We have an interest in ensuring that those troops who may potentially be withdrawn from Germany remain in Europe. And the second aspect, I suppose, is in which specific country they would be stationed. In Lithuania, we are prepared to receive as many allies as we are capable of hosting. And to that end, we are putting in place all the necessary infrastructure, both for exercises and for accommodation.
Should President Donald Trump, for any of the reasons that have been discussed and stated publicly, take the decision to reduce the component of United States troops in Germany, we in Poland are ready and willing to receive American soldiers. We have the infrastructure in place to do so, and it is in the interest of both Poland and Lithuania and of the Baltic states that the largest possible number of American troops should be stationed here.
Australia is preparing for the return of citizens linked to Islamic State, a move that raises difficult questions about security, justice and reintegration. Several women and children are expected to arrive from northeast Syria, with police warning some could face arrest on arrival.
Australian citizens linked to Islamic State are expected to arrive home on Thursday night after leaving detention camps in northeast Syria. 4 women and 9 children are believed to be travelling on flights to Sydney and Melbourne via Qatar, according to Australian media reports. The Australian government says it is not assisting their return. Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke said there are legal limits on preventing Australian citizens from re-entering the country, even in cases linked to extremist organisations. However, they can face arrest upon arrival.
I will not flag how many individuals will be arrested or when they will be arrested to protect a number of our investigations. However, I will confirm these points. Some individuals will be arrested and charged. Some will face continued investigations when they arrive in Australia. And children who return in the cohort will be asked to undergo community integration programs, therapeutic support, and countering violent extremism programs.
Many of the women travelled to Syria between 2012 and 2016 to join husbands who had allegedly become members of Islamic State. After the collapse of the group's self-declared caliphate in 2019, many relatives of suspected fighters were detained in camps including Al-Hol and Roj near the Iraqi border, while some had returned home. Australian media say fewer than 1,000 families now remain in the camps in northeast Syria.
Azerbaijan's long-running partnership with NATO is now caught in a political blockage in Brussels. The programme is technically close to approval, but France's opposition has turned a defence cooperation file into another point of tension between Baku, Paris and the wider alliance. Recently, I had a chance to sit down with NATO Deputy Secretary General Radmila Shcherenko, and this is what was discussed.
For over 3 decades, Azerbaijan and NATO have collaborated on counter-terrorism and energy security. But today, that partnership is at a standstill in Brussels. At the heart of the issue is the Individually Tailored Partnership Programme, or ITPP. The ITPP is NATO's modern unified framework designed to replace older, fragmented agreements. It acts as a strategic roadmap to align military standards and expand cooperation in critical areas like energy security, humanitarian demining, and emergency response. NATO Deputy Secretary General Radmila Shcherenko recently noted the programme's progress.
We have more or less concluded the discussions on a new program. It is called ITPP, Individually Tailored Partnership Program between NATO and Azerbaijan. And we do hope that in the time ahead of us, we will be able to conclude this process, and we will be able to provide this framework for an enhanced cooperation with Azerbaijan.
Despite this technical readiness, France has repeatedly used the silence procedure to halt the document's approval. Paris has linked its opposition to the legal case of French citizens detained in Baku, a move Azerbaijan views as an attempt to turn bilateral tensions into a tool of international pressure. This follows a broader pattern. Since 2021, the European Parliament, driven by French delegations, has passed 14 anti-Azerbaijan resolutions. However, the blockade is having an unexpected side effect. By halting Azerbaijan's program, France has inadvertently created a stalemate for Armenia. In a reciprocal move, Baku's strategic partners within NATO have reportedly delayed the approval of Yerevan's own partnership program. As a result, France has shifted toward unilateral military support for Armenia, providing equipment and instructors outside the official NATO framework. The ITPP remains pending as diplomatic talks continue in Brussels with no clear timeline for a resolution.
Algeria and Tunisia's energy ties are not just about gas, they're about geography, dependence and regional weight. As Europe looks south for stable supply, Tunisia's role as a transit route is becoming harder to ignore.
This is not a new relationship. Algeria has long been one of Tunisia's main gas suppliers, making energy cooperation a core part of ties between the two neighbours.
Algeria is Tunisia's leading gas supplier, and electricity generation in Tunisia depends heavily on its neighbour Algeria, which makes this a truly strategic relationship. In the context of wars and tensions, especially in energy-producing regions, it is becoming increasingly important for African countries, and North African countries in particular, to strengthen their partnerships in the energy sector and expand cooperation in energy production.
For Algeria, this fits a broader role as a major regional producer. Through Sonatrach, it positions itself as a reliable supplier, making its energy ties with Tunisia part of a wider regional energy security framework.
Algeria has strong assets that position it to play a key role in ensuring stable and reliable energy supplies, thanks to its natural resources, strategic location, and advanced infrastructure.
That cooperation is also built on infrastructure. The Transmed pipeline crossing Tunisia remains a major energy corridor between North Africa and Europe, giving Tunisia a strategic transit role and helping move Algerian gas to European markets.
Europe has a tremendous need to import natural gas to satisfy its industrial and residential needs. When Europe looks south across the Mediterranean Sea, it's going to find Algeria, which is the first natural gas producer in Africa. However, Algeria is not geographically the closest point to Europe. When you look east, however, to Tunisia, there is a very interesting pipeline called Transmed that is able to carry over 30 billion cubic meter per year to deserve Italy and Slovenia.
The broader picture is one of continuity. Algeria supplies gas, Tunisia remains both a market and a transit route, and the partnership rests on geography, infrastructure, and mutual need.
Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime. Andy Mioch will be here tomorrow evening, bringing you plenty more news and analysis. But from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.